I spent 50 years believing I was an only child until a DNA test revealed I had a sister living just 2 towns away from me this entire time. My name is Michael, and for the first 53 years of my life, I thought I knew exactly who I was. I was the only child of Robert and Helen Chin, born in 1970 in a small town outside of Portland, Oregon. My parents were quiet, hardworking people who immigrated from Taiwan in the 1960s. Dad worked at the local electronics factory. Mom cleaned houses for wealthy families on the other side of town. We weren't rich, but we were happy. Growing up, I always felt like something was missing. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and forget why you came in? That's how my childhood felt, like there was always something just out of reach. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I'd watch other families at the grocery store, parents juggling multiple kids, siblings arguing over cereal choices, and I'd feel this weird pang of longing. When I asked my parents why I didn't have brothers or sisters, they'd always give me the same answer. You're special, Michael. You're all we need. But there were strange things that never made sense, like how I was so much taller than both my parents. They were barely 5'4", and I shot up to 6'1" by high school. My eyes were different too. Theirs were dark brown, almost black, while mine were this unusual hazel green that people always commented on. Where did you get those beautiful eyes? Strangers would ask, and my parents would just smile and change the subject. I remember being about 12 years old, helping Mom organize old photo albums. I noticed something odd. There were hardly any baby pictures of me. Maybe 3 or 4 photos from my first year, which seemed strange for parents who were otherwise meticulous about documenting everything. When I asked about it, Mom got this panicked look and said the rest were lost in a flood in our old apartment. But we'd never lived in an apartment that flooded. We'd been in the same house since I was born. The questions multiplied as I got older. Why didn't I look like either of them? Why were there no relatives on either side of the family? My parents claimed their families had died in Taiwan, but they never talked about them, never shared stories, never seemed sad about this massive loss. It was like their entire history started when they arrived in America. Despite all these mysteries, I had a good childhood. My parents loved me fiercely, maybe even overprotectively. They were at every school play, every baseball game, every parent-teacher conference. Dad taught me how to fix cars in our garage, and Mom made sure I never went to bed without a home-cooked meal. When I graduated high school, they cried like they were sending me off to war instead of the local community college. I met my wife Jennifer in college. She came from this massive Italian family, 3 sisters, 2 brothers, cousins everywhere. Sunday dinners that required folding tables to fit everyone. The first time she brought me home, I was overwhelmed by the chaos and the noise and the constant stream of food and laughter. But I was also jealous. This was what I'd been missing my whole life. That sense of belonging to something bigger than yourself. Jennifer noticed how fascinated I was by her family dynamics. You're like an anthropologist studying us, she'd joke, but it wasn't funny to me. I was trying to understand something I'd never experienced. When her little nephew scraped his knee and 3 different people rushed to help him, I realized that's what it meant to have backup, to never face the world alone. We got married in 1995, and Jennifer kept pushing me to have kids. I want our children to have cousins, she'd say. I want big family gatherings. But something held me back. How could I give my kids the extended family experience when I did, and even understand my own family? The questions about my parents grew louder as I got older, but whenever I tried to dig deeper, they'd shut down completely. Mom died in 2015, and Dad followed 2 years later. I expected to finally get answers when we cleaned out their house, but instead, I found more questions. Hidden in a shoebox in their closet were documents I'd never seen. Immigration papers, but with dates that didn't match what they'd told me. There was also a letter written in Chinese that I couldn't read, and a small black and white photo of a little girl, maybe 4 or 5 years old, standing next to a woman I didn't recognize. I showed the photo to Jennifer. "Who do you think this is?" I asked. She studied it carefully. "The little girl looks like you, Michael. Same eyes, same smile. Could it be you?" But I knew it wasn't me. This child was clearly a girl, and something about her face was familiar in a way that made my chest tight. I took the letter to a translator, and what she told me changed everything. It wasn't a letter at all. It was a birth certificate. For a girl named Lily Chen, born in 1968 in Taipei, Taiwan, 2 years before me. This can't be right, I told Jennifer that night. My parents would have told me if I had a sister. But deep down I knew it was true. All those years of feeling incomplete, of sensing something missing, maybe it wasn't something. Maybe it was someone. The discovery of that birth certificate turned my world upside down. Couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't focus on anything except the possibility that I had a sister out there somewhere. Jennifer found me at 3 a.m. multiple nights in a row, sitting at the kitchen table with that photo, staring at the little girl's face, and trying to make sense of 43 years of lies. Maybe there's an explanation, Jennifer kept saying. Maybe she died and it was too painful for them to talk about. But I knew that wasn't it. If my sister had died, wouldn't there be some evidence? A grave marker? Medical records? Something? There was this deliberate erasure, this careful construction of a reality where I was an only child. The more I thought about it, the more sinister it felt. I started going through every document in my parents' house with a fine-tooth comb. In a folder tucked behind their tax returns, I found more pieces of the puzzle. Immigration records that showed my parents had applied for visas for 2 children, not 1. Medical form with 2 names listed, Michael Chen and Lily Chen. And most disturbing of all, a handwritten note in my mother's writing that simply said, L. Oregon Children's Services, with a phone number, Oregon Children's Services. Why would my parents have contact information for social services? The implication hit me like a truck. Had they given my sister away? Had they chosen to keep me and surrender her? The thought made me physically sick. I called the number, but it was disconnected. The woman at the main Oregon Children's Services line was polite, but firm records from the 1970s were sealed. And even if they weren't, she couldn't give information to someone who wasn't directly involved in the case. I understand your frustration, she said. But without proper documentation, proving your relationship to the child in question, my hands are tied. That's when the obsession really began. I took time off work and spent entire days at the library, scrolling through old newspaper records, searching for any mention of the Chen family or children in foster care. I contacted every adoption agency in Oregon, Washington, and Northern California. Most wouldn't even return my calls. Jennifer started to worry about me. You're losing yourself in this, she said one evening when she found me surrounded by printed emails and photocopied documents. Maybe some things are meant to stay buried. I couldn't let it go. The more I searched, the more evidence I found that my entire childhood had been built on a lie. I discovered that my parents had never actually worked at the jobs they claimed. The electronics factory had no record of a Robert Chen, and none of the houses Mom supposedly cleaned belonged to families who remembered her. It was like they'd constructed an entirely fictional life. The breaking point came when I found their real immigration records. Not the fake ones in the shoebox, but the actual government documents I obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request. My parents had arrived in the United States in 1970 with 2 children, a 2-year-old girl and a newborn boy. But by 1971, only 1 child appeared on their tax returns. Me. What had happened to Lily? The questions consumed every waking moment. I started having dreams about a little girl calling my name, reaching for me through a crowd. I'd wake up with tears on my face and this overwhelming sense of loss for someone I could uneven remember. Jennifer suggested therapy, but how do you explain to a therapist that you remourning a sister you never knew you had? How do you process grief for a relationship that was stolen from you before you were old enough to remember it? The worst part was the betrayal. Every birthday, every holiday, every family dinner had been a performance. When my parents tucked me into bed and told me I was their special only child, they were lying to my face. When I begged them for a sibling, and they said it wasn't possible, they knew exactly where my sister was and chose to keep us apart. I started to question everything. If they could lie about something this fundamental, what else had been fabricated? Or even my biological parents? Was my name really Michael? The foundation of my identity had completely crumbled. 3 months into my search, I hit another wall. Every lead had gone cold. Every agency had turned me away. Every document had revealed more questions than answers. I was sitting in my car outside the Oregon Children's Services building, crying from frustration when Jennifer called. "I've been doing some research too," she said quietly, "and I think I know how we can find her." She'd been reading about DNA testing services online. Companies like 23andMe and Ancestry.com were helping people find biological relatives they'd never known about. "If she's out there," Jennifer said, "and if she's ever taken one of these tests, we might be able to connect." The idea terrified me. What if we found her and she didn't want to be found? What if she knew about me and had chosen not to reach out? What if she was angry about being given away? What if she blamed me for being the child our parents chose to keep? But the alternative? Spending the rest of my life wondering was even worse. I hung up the phone and stared at the Children's Services building one more time. Somewhere out there was a woman who shared my DNA, my early childhood, my parents. She was living her life completely unaware that I was searching for her. That night, I ordered the DNA kit. As I sealed the envelope with my saliva sample inside, my hands were shaking. I had no idea that in 6 weeks, everything I thought I knew about family, fate, and the power of truth would change forever. The DNA kit sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I could bring myself to actually spit into the tube. Such a simple action. Providing a saliva sample that could unlock 50 years of secrets, but it felt monumental. It's like standing at the edge of a cliff and deciding whether to jump. Jennifer found me staring at the unopened box for the 3rd morning in a row. "What are you afraid of?" she asked, pouring her coffee and settling into the chair across from me. "Everything," I admitted. "What if she doesn't exist? What if the documents were wrong and I've been chasing a ghost this whole time? What if she does exist but wants nothing to do with me? What if she's had a terrible life because our parents gave her away and finding out about me just makes it worse?" But there was something else I didn't want to say out loud. I was terrified that finding her would somehow diminish the love I'd have felt for my parents. Despite the lies, despite the betrayal, they had been good parents to me. They'd sacrificed everything to give me opportunities, worked double shifts to pay for my college, never missed a single important moment in my life. What if learning the truth about Lily made me hate them? What if it ruined the good memories I had? Jennifer reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You know what I think? I think your parents loved both of you. Maybe they made an impossible choice in an impossible situation. Maybe finding her won't destroy your family. Maybe it'll complete it." That afternoon, I finally opened the kit. The instructions were simple, almost laughably so for something that could reshape your entire existence. Spit in the tube, shake the stabilizing solution, seal the package, mail it off. I read the privacy policy 3 times, paranoid about who would have access to my genetic information. But in the end, my need for answers was stronger than my fear of consequences. The hardest part was the waiting. 6 to 8 weeks for results, they said, but it felt like a lifetime. I threw myself into work, trying to distract myself from constantly checking my email for updates. I'd refresh the testing company's website multiple times a day, watching the progress bar slowly move from sample received to DNA extracted to analysis in progress. Jennifer tried to help by planning distractions, weekend trips, dinner dates, movie nights, but I was terrible company. My mind was always elsewhere, imagining what my sister might look like now, what her life had been like, whether she'd ever wondered about her biological family. I found myself studying every Asian woman I saw who appeared to be in her mid-50s, wondering if we could be related. 3 weeks into the waiting period, I had what I can only describe as a panic attack. I was in the grocery store, in the cereal aisle of all places, when this wave of terror washed over me. What if finding my sister opened a door I couldn't close? What if she had children who didn't know they had an uncle? What if her adoptive parents were still alive and felt threatened by my sudden appearance? What if I was about to destroy multiple families in my quest for truth? I called Jennifer from the parking lot, hyperventilating. I think I made a mistake, I told her. I think I should withdraw the test, ask them to destroy my sample. It's too late for that, she said gently. And besides, you'd never forgive yourself if you gave up now. You've come too far. She was right, but that didn't make the anxiety any easier to bear. I started having insomnia, lying awake at night, composing different versions of the first message I might send to my sister. How do you introduce yourself to someone who doesn't know you exist? How do you explain 50 years of separation in a way that doesn't sound crazy? The waiting period also forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about my motivations. Was I really doing this for noble reasons? To find my sister and give us both the family connection we deep in denied? Or was I being selfish, disrupting her life to satisfy my own curiosity? Did I have the right to potentially append her world just because I'd discovered some old documents? I talked to a therapist during this time, finally admitting that I needed professional help to process everything I was feeling. Dr. Martinez was patient with my rambling explanations and pointed questions about my parents' motivations. She helped me understand that my anger toward my parents and my love for them were unmutually exclusive. That I could grieve the relationship with my sister that we'd been denied while still appreciating the life they'd given me. Sometimes, she said during one particularly difficult session, people make choices that seem unforgivable from the outside, but made sense in their specific circumstances. Your parents came to a new country with 2 small children, probably struggling financially and emotionally. We may never know why they made the decision they did, but that doesn't mean it was made without love or without pain. As the 6-week mark approached, I became obsessive about checking my email. The testing company had warned that results could take up to 8 weeks, but I convinced myself that mine would be ready early. Every day without an update felt like a personal rejection. Finally, on a Tuesday morning in March, exactly 7 weeks after I'd mailed my sample, I woke up to an email with the subject line, "Your DNA results are ready." I stared at it for almost 10 minutes without opening it, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Jennifer was already at work, so I was alone in the house when I finally clicked the link. The website loaded slowly, each second stretching like an hour. And then, there it was, a page full of pie charts and percentages, genetic markers and health predispositions, and at the bottom, a section labeled DNA relatives. My hands were shaking as I scrolled down to see what it had found. I'll never forget that moment as long as I live. Out there, at the top of my DNA relatives list, was a match labeled close family, predicted relationship, half-sibling, or aunt. The profile name was simply LM. No photo, no additional information, just those 2 initials that made my heart stop. L. Lily. I stared at the screen until my eyes watered, afraid to blink in case the information disappeared. The match showed 1,847 centimorgans of shared DNA. The website's help section explained this was consistent with a half-sibling relationship. After 50 years of wondering, there she was, reduced to a data point on a genetic testing website. My hands were trembling so badly, I could barely click on her profile. The basic information was sparse. Female, age range 50 to 55, location listed as Pacific Northwest. No profile picture, no family tree, no additional details. She'd clearly opted for maximum privacy settings, which made sense but also made her feel more mysterious and unreachable. I sat there for what felt like hours, just staring at those initials. LM, what did the M stand for? Was it her married name? Her adoptive family's name? Had she taken her husband's surname and buried our family name completely? There were so many questions, and this tiny profile held no answers. The website had a messaging feature for contacting DNA matches. But what do you say to someone who doesn't know you exist? I must have started and deleted 20 different messages that first day. "Hi, I think we might be related," sounded too casual. "I believe you're my sister," sounded too presumptuous. I found documents suggesting we're siblings sounded too clinical. I couldn't eat, couldn't focus on work, Couldn't think about anything except those 2 letters on my screen. Jennifer came home to find me in exactly the same position she'd left me that morning. Laptop open, staring at the same page. "Is that her?" she asked softly, looking over my shoulder. "I think so." The DNA match is strong enough to be a sibling, and the age range fits. But she hasn't included any personal information. I don't know how to contact her without sounding like a complete lunatic. Jennifer sat down next to me and studied the profile. Maybe start simple. Tell her you got some unexpected DNA results and ask if she'd be willing to talk. Don't overwhelm her with the whole story right away. That night, I finally composed a message I was willing to send. "Hi, my name is Michael Chen. I recently received my DNA results and was surprised to see that we share a significant amount of genetic material. I don't want to make any assumptions, but I was hoping you might be willing to share some basic information about your family background. I have some questions about my own family history that your profile might help answer. I understand this is unusual, and I completely respect your privacy if you'd prefer not to respond. Thank you for your time." I read it 50 times before hitting send, second-guessing every word. Was it too formal, too vague, too pushy? But eventually I realized that no message would be perfect. The fear of saying the wrong thing was keeping me from saying anything at all. After I sent it, the waiting began all over again. But this was a different kind of waiting, more intense, more personal. Before, I was waiting for scientific results. I was waiting for a human being to decide whether or not to let me into her life. The first day passed with no response, then the second. By the 3rd day, I was convinced she'd read my message and chosen to ignore it. Maybe she knew exactly who I was and wanted nothing to do with me. Maybe she'd had a happy life with her adoptive family and didn't want complications from her biological past. On the 4th day, I was at work when my phone buzzed with an email notification. The sender was listed as Ancestred in a message, and my heart immediately started racing. I closed my office door and opened the email with shaking hands. "Michael, I got your message, and I think I know why you're contacting me. I was adopted as a child and have always wondered about my biological family. I was born in Taiwan in 1968, and my birth name was Lily Chen. If you're who I think you are, I've been looking for you my entire life. Are you my little brother?" I read the message 3 times before the words fully sank in. She knew. She remembered. She'd been looking for me too. All these years I'd been mourning the loss of a sister who didn't know I existed. She'd been out there wondering about me, searching for me, hoping to find me. I immediately called Jennifer, barely able to get the words out through my tears. She knows who I am. She remembers. She's been looking for me too. That afternoon, we exchanged phone numbers. At 7 p.m. Pacific time, after 50 years of separation, I heard my sister's voice for the first time since we were children. "Michael," she said when I answered, and I could tell she was crying. "Lily. Oh my God, it's really you. Can't believe it's really you." We talked for 4 hours that first night. She told me about her life, how she'd been placed in foster care when she was 4, eventually adopted by a wonderful family named Morrison, who gave her every opportunity but could never fill the hole left by losing her original family. She'd married young, had 2 children, and spent decades wondering what had happened to her baby brother and why their parents had kept me but given her away. "I used to have dreams about you," she said. "A little boy with green eyes, calling for me. I never knew if you were real or just wishful thinking." When we finally hung up that night, I felt something I'd never experienced before, complete. Like a puzzle piece had finally clicked into place. The euphoria of finding Lily lasted exactly 3 days before the anger set in. We'd been texting constantly, sharing photos, filling in the gaps of 50 years apart. When she asked the question that changed everything, "Do you know why they kept you and gave me away?" I'd been so focused on the joy of reconnecting that I hadn't fully processed the cruelty of what our parents had done. They hadn't just made one terrible decision, they'd made a deliberate, ongoing choice every single day for 50 years to keep us apart. Every birthday card they'd sent me, every holiday dinner, every proud moment they'd celebrated with me, they could have shared with both of us. Lily's story made it worse. She told me about her first foster home, where she'd been placed with a family who already had 6 children and barely noticed when she cried herself to sleep every night, asking for her mommy and her baby brother. She remembered me clearly, remembered helping change my diapers, singing me lullabies, holding my hand when we crossed the street. She'd been my big sister, my protector, and they'd ripped that away from both of us. I used to tell my foster families that I had a baby brother named Michael, she said during one of our marathon phone calls. They thought I was making it up, creating an imaginary friend to cope with the trauma. One foster mother even took me to a child psychologist because she was worried about my fantasy family. The more details she shared, the angrier I became. While I'd been growing up as an only child, getting all of our parents' attention and resources, she'd been bounced between foster homes, struggling with abandonment issues, never understanding why her family had disappeared. She'd spent her teenage years acting out, convinced she was unlovable, because the people who were supposed to care for her most had given her away. I started having imaginary conversations with my dead parents, screaming arguments that left me exhausted, and Jennifer worried about my mental state. How could they have watched me beg for siblings, knowing I had one who was probably begging for me too? How could they have slept at night, knowing they'd traumatize both of their children with this decision? I need to understand why they did it, I told Jennifer one evening after a particularly difficult conversation with Lily about her years in the foster system. I need to find someone who knew them back then, someone who can explain what they were thinking. The problem was that my parents had been intensely private, people who'd seemed to deliberately avoid forming close friendships. But I remembered Mrs. Wong, an elderly woman who'd lived next door when I was in elementary school. She'd immigrated from Taiwan around the same time as my parents. I recalled her and my mother having long conversations in Mandarin over the fence that separated our backyards. It took some detective work to find her. She'd moved to a senior living facility in Portland. But when I called, she remembered me immediately. Michael, little Michael Chen. How are your parents? She asked, and I had to explain that they'd both passed away. Mrs. Wong, I need to ask you something, and it might sound strange. Did my parents ever mention having another child? Daughter. The long pause on the other end of the line told me everything I needed to know. You found out about Lily, she said finally, her voice heavy with sadness. You knew? The betrayal felt fresh all over again. You knew I had a sister, and you never said anything? Michael, please understand. Your parents made me promise never to tell you. They said it would only cause you pain. She agreed to meet with me that weekend, and what she told me changed everything I thought I understood about the situation. My parents hadn't given Lily away because they didn't love her or because they preferred me. They'd made the decision because they were desperate and terrified and saw no other option. When your parents came to America, they had almost nothing, Mrs. Wong explained, her weathered hands wrapped around a cup of tea. Your father's English was very poor. Your mother was working 3 jobs just to pay for a tiny apartment. You were sick as a baby, constantly sick, and the medical bills were crushing them. She painted a picture of 2 people drowning, trying to keep their family together. While everything fell apart around them, the decision to place Lily in foster care wasn't permanent. They'd hoped to get back on their feet financially and bring her home. But the system made it increasingly difficult, and as months turned into years, their little girl became a stranger. They tried to get her back, Mrs. Wong insisted. For almost 2 years, they fought the system, attended every hearing, completed every requirement. But by then, she'd been placed with a family who wanted to adopt her, and the judge felt it would be cruel to disrupt her life again. The information should have made me feel better, but it only made the tragedy more complete. Not only had my parents lost their daughter, I'd lost my sister, and Lily had lost her entire original family. Everyone had been traumatized by circumstances and a system that had failed all of us. But I was still angry. Maybe their initial decision had been understandable, but what about the decades of lies that followed? What about choosing to never tell me the truth, even as an adult who could have handled it? They were ashamed, Mrs. Wong said simply. They felt like failures as parents. Every year that passed made it harder to explain why they'd kept it secret for so long. When I got home that evening, I called Lily and shared what I'd learned. We both cried. For our parents, for each other, for the family we could have been if circumstances had been different. I don't know if I can forgive them, Lily said finally. I don't know either, I admitted, but I think we have to try. For our own sake, if nothing else. 6 months after that first DNA match appeared on my screen, Lily and I met in person for the first time in 50 years. They'd planned it carefully. A neutral location, a park in Seattle that was halfway between our cities. I'd seen photos of her by then, talked to her for hundreds of hours. Done, but nothing had prepared me for the moment when I saw her walking toward the bench where I was waiting. She looked exactly like I'd imagined and nothing like I'd expected, all at the same time. The family resemblance was undeniable. We had the same eyes, the same smile, the same way of tilting our heads when we were thinking. But she was also completely herself, shaped by 50 years of experiences I hadn't shared. Carrying herself with a grace and strength that spoke to everything she'd overcome, we stood there for a moment, two middle-aged people staring at each other across a lifetime of separation, and then she smiled and said, "You're taller than I expected, little brother." That broke the tension, and we both started laughing and crying at the same time. When we hugged, it felt like coming home to a place I'd never been, but it always belonged. We spent the entire weekend together, walking through Pike Place Market, sharing meals, filling in the gaps of our separate lives. She told me about her children, my nephew and niece, who I'd never known existed, and I showed her pictures of the life I'd built with Jennifer. We compared scars and stories, discovered we both hated cilantro and loved old movies, marveled at the ways genetics had shaped our personalities despite our completely different upbringings. But we also talked about the hard stuff. The years of therapy Lily had needed to overcome her abandonment issues. The way I'd struggled with feeling incomplete without understanding why. The relationships we'd both had that were complicated by our respective traumas. The anger we still carried toward our parents mixed with a growing understanding of their impossible situation. "I've been thinking about forgiveness a lot lately," Lily said, as we sat by the water on our last day together. "Not because I think they deserve it, but because I'm tired of carrying this anger around. It's been poisoning my relationships for 50 years. I knew what she meant. Since finding her, I'd been consumed with rage about the time we'd lost, the connection we'd been denied, the lies that had shaped both our lives. But the anger was exhausting, and it was keeping me from fully appreciating the miracle of having found each other at all. We made a pact that weekend to focus on the future instead of the past. We couldn't change what our parents had done, but we could control what we did with the rest of our lives. We planned holiday visits, talked about our children meeting their previously unknown cousins, discussed all the traditions we wanted to create together. The integration of Lily into my life wasn't seamless. Jennifer was wonderful about making space for this new relationship, but it still required adjustments. Learning to be a brother at 53 was harder than I'd expected. We had to navigate different communication styles, different approaches to conflict, different ways of processing emotions. Sometimes our conversations felt awkward, weighted down by everything we didn't know about each other. But slowly, we found our rhythm, started calling each other every Sunday, sharing the mundane details of our weeks, along with the bigger life updates. We discovered we both loved to cook and started exchanging family recipes, including some our mother had taught us both before we were separated. We introduced our children to each other, and watching them connect was almost as healing as our own reunion. The DNA test that had started this journey also connected us with other relatives we'd never known about. Cousins in Taiwan who'd been looking for our parents for decades, extended family members who filled in more pieces of our parents' story. We learned that our family's immigration to America had been even more traumatic than we'd realized, involving political persecution and genuine fear for their lives. It didn't excuse the lies, but it provided context for their choices. A year after we first spoke, Lily and I made a trip together to Taiwan to meet our extended family and visit our parents' village. Standing in the place where our parents had grown up, seeing the poverty and upheaval they'd fled, we gained a deeper understanding of the desperate circumstances that had shaped their decisions. It didn't erase the pain, but it added layers of complexity to our feelings about them. That trip also gave us closure in an unexpected way. At our parents' ancestral shrine, we performed a ceremony that acknowledged both our grief about the separation and our gratitude for finding each other. We told their spirits that we forgave them, not because